Welcome to the Leading at the Next Level podcast with Dove Development Consultant, a show built to provide ongoing support for your leadership journey. Before we move into today's lesson, let's make sure that we're on the same page. We've seen firsthand how much more is required to provide authentic leadership to a team than to simply manage based on the authority that comes with a title or position. What we've learned through more than 50 combined years of leadership responsibility is that taking the extra steps to serve people and earn influence will always produce results that barking orders never will. And if you'll stick with us through the end of the episode, we'll share how you can get a complimentary trial to a resource that we've built that's like nothing else you've ever seen. Now, with that in mind, let's get to work. This episode is going to be the first in a series that really builds on what we've looked at so far in those profitability killers. This time, we're going to start to dig in to the cost of constantly having to recruit new team members. We're going to look at the cost of constant recruiting. So, and to give you the background, having just wrapped up a look in the last lesson I shared in this program at how high turnover kills so much of an organization's profitability, I felt like, gosh, it just makes sense to shift that focus to the costs of recruiting. Now, if we are indeed able to really provide our best team members, the great ones we've got, with a solid reason to stay, that pressure to really add anybody with a pulse to our team, it should be nearly non-existent. But anytime we've got to fill a key role, attracting great candidates, it does indeed come with a high price tag. Now, as we take aim at this particular profitability killer, we need to really come to terms with what the total costs are, because, gosh, most organizations don't capture nearly all of them. We've also got to look at how having a strong leadership culture improves the entire process. And then we're going to tie it all together with some steps that really any leader can take to begin developing a strong pipeline of future team members. So to set the stage, let's get some perspective for what those costs really look like. Now, an article I found from the Society for Human Resource Management, it was from April of 2022. It was called The Real Costs of Recruitment. It cited recent, at the time, benchmarking data from that organization as showing that the average cost per hire was nearly $4,700. The author of that particular article went on to state that many employers estimate the total cost to hire a new employee can be 3 to 4 times the position's salary. And I've seen that in so many different sources. They referenced someone named Edie Goldberg, who founded a talent management and development company in Menlo Park, California, and was the co-author of a book called The Inside Gig. In that article where they referenced it, it shared of those costs. This Edie Goldberg said, I would say that 30% to 40% tend to be those that show up as line items in a budget or on an expense report: advertising fees, placement testing, drug screens, background checks, and so on and so forth. Now, that's something that I've seen directly. I've seen that a bunch. The soft costs, the ones that I've rarely seen show up anywhere, and organizations capture as part of the total cost of recruiting, really tend to be the ones that were defined in that article as including the time departmental leaders and managers invest in supporting HR specific roles of the hiring process. Now, let me give you some perspective. In late 2019, I sat in on a public policy meeting in our local chamber of commerce, and I was with several different local business owners. They were from various different industries throughout our area where we're at here. The conversation, it landed on some of the concerns about workforce, which was right up my alley, because at that time I was about halfway through Workforce Development Board's executive committee, and I was really tuned in. I was really familiar with the issues that they were all concerned about. Now, at that point, unemployment in our area here in the central Shenandoah Valley of Virginia was at a historically low 2.6%. So effectively, that meant anybody that wanted to work was working when unemployment was that low. Now, every business that was represented in that room had open positions, and many of those businesses offered substantial wage and benefits package. Now, fast forward to present day, where we're kind of on the tail end of what we saw as a global pandemic. We're experiencing what had been for several months and even quarters record high inflation, and we're seeing signs of a market downturn. And if you pay close attention to the news, you might even hear them talking about an impending recession. Now, I still can't think of very many companies in our area that aren't hiring at some level or another. It might not be as rampant as it was before, but there's still a lot of them. And I'm going to say that wages have gone up significantly since that meeting, that public policy meeting that I sat in on in October of 2019. The one constant that I can point to for any business with open positions, be that from early 2013 through late 2014, when I hired more than 225 employees for just one company, in late 2019 with that 2.6% unemployment rate, or right now, has been a constant need for great people with a solid set of skills that are relevant to those industries. Now, in a 2016 article I found that was shared on LinkedIn by a fellow named Mark Lufkin, it was called "How Recruiting Can Help Improve Profitability." It grabbed my attention right away because it made some comparisons between the movie Moneyball that I'm crazy about because it's baseball references and so on. It made comparisons to that to recruiting in the business world. Now, Lufkin suggests that when hiring is done correctly, a company can get the right person for a role with all the required skills and a perfect cultural fit and not have to pay the highest salary. I agree 100%. But just like Brad Pitt preached in that movie as he portrayed Billy Bean, the traditional approach isn't always going to yield the results that we need. Now, before we can hope to capture the profit that we're losing with an improved process, I believe it's going to really serve us well to have as a baseline for us for what we need to look at avoiding, so we can really capture that profit, so we can eliminate a lot of those costs that we deal with that high recruiting. Now, we're going to go in the Wayback Machine. On January 2nd of 1996. I had an epiphany, okay? I was scraping ice off of a 2x4 purlin that I was getting ready to nail down roofing metal to on a poultry house that I was helping build. And I realized, gosh, I don't want to make a living as a carpenter for the rest of my life. Now, truth be told, I really didn't want to do it for the rest of that day, but I kind of liked eating food. I still do. I kind of like sleeping inside. I still do. So I pushed through. I went through it, but a week or so later, I was one of maybe 1,000 or so folks that applied for about 40 full-time positions that had opened up with a local manufacturing company. And that at the time was an employer that hadn't really hired full-time employees straight off the street in close to a decade. Now, after more than a month of competency tests and interviews, I was one of those 40 that accepted an offer, and I started with that organization on March 12th of 1996. And at the time, I started what I thought was going to be the job that got me through college. Now, before I go on, I want to stress that I am absolutely forever grateful for the experience that I learned through the carpentry jobs that I've had. Prior to that position, it's been something that's really served me well to this day. My desire for change, though, on January 2nd, 1996, was largely driven by trying to drive nails. That ice I mentioned earlier was one thing that we were scraping off those purlins, but I was trying to drive nails through multiple sheets of metal as we were putting the roof metal on with a hand that I'd broken just a 36 hours prior on New Year's Eve. That's a whole story for another time. I'm not going to bog you down with it here. But the points that I really want to call your attention to are that I was one of 1,000 people that applied for those 40 open positions. And this job that I thought would get me through college lasted nearly 19 years, which was still less time than it took me to finish a degree, by the way, but that's a side story as well. Now, I don't share that 1 out of 1,000 to boast, but to make a point that recruiting was significantly different in those days, and it still carried a hefty cost. It still wasn't free, but it was way different. Now, during the almost 2 decades that I was with that organization, I held several different roles. And I was blessed to gain some what I feel like has been incredibly valuable experience, including the last 18 months where I hired over 125 candidates I'm sorry, hired the 225 candidates that I mentioned earlier here. Now, to say that I saw some pretty drastic changes over the years, that might qualify as the understatement of the biggest understatement in history. Now, not only did that organizational culture change significantly in that 18 and a half, 19 years that I was there, I can assure you that there was no time during that year and a half where I was tasked with hiring all those people that I saw anything that resembled the interest in working for that organization that existed in 1996 when I started. Now, don't get me wrong, I definitely reviewed well over 1,000 applications, and quite frankly, I probably interviewed close to 1,000 people. But all of that, but at that point, it took that many to find 225 folks who had anything close to relevant skills, could pass a drug screen, and had a clean enough background check that we didn't have to hire armed guards, right? Now, I share all that with you for one very specific reason. Through varying economic conditions, the approach to recruiting candidates changed very, very little, but produced wildly different results in that specific organization. One of the constants that I saw was that the recruiting process itself, as well as the time required to bring somebody up to speed, ended up being quite a profitability killer, right? In the decade or so since, I've only seen the impact recruiting has on profitability grow. Regardless of how many open positions an organization has, there's rarely a time where too many outstanding candidates are waiting in line to fill a spot. I mean, if it's happening, I'm not hearing about it. I'm not seeing business owners saying, wait, we've got too many exceptional candidates that we can't put them in. We don't have enough openings to put all these people in. That's not the case. Usually it's like, dear God, we need somebody to fill these spots. Another constant has been that the responsibility for filling these open positions generally lands squarely in the lap of someone, usually somebody wearing some sort of HR hat, who does not have the final say in what the overall organizational culture is going to be. This often can result in huge advertising budgets with hopes of making the open positions at least visible to anybody with a pulse, and offering, in many cases, massive sign-on bonuses to the folks who have anything close to the skills that we need for those roles, right? Now, we've all heard some variation of the idea that if we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always got. There's a fellow named Eric Hoffer that said, in times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. Now, I believe this is just as applicable to the recruiting process, especially if we want to capture even a portion of that lost profitability, as it is to anything else in the world that Hoffer was referring to maybe when he made that statement initially. Now, I also believe that doing this is going to require us to break away from that traditional recruiting approach and build a strong leadership presence in how we attract people to our teams. So we can certainly stick with the way that it's always been in a recruiting approach if we want to, but I've only seen that kill more and more profitability over the last decade or so. With such a drastic increase in minimum wage in just a short time as we record this, it's almost doubled in the last 24 months. The skills trade shortage that we hear so much about, that I would argue that's been brewing since the late 1980s or even earlier, when at that point in time it seemed like even middle school kids began facing the stigma of failing in life unless they got some type of liberal arts degree, and a whole host of other factors that have just added to the difficulty of attracting candidates since that COVID net was kind of cast across the globe. I'd suggest that we consider breaking some of that tradition and taking an entirely different approach to recruiting the best people in our respective industries to be part of our teams. And we need to take that active approach, right? Now, I found an Investopedia article. It was called "The Cost of Hiring a New Employee," that shared this. It said, and I'll read this quote to you. It said, hiring a new employee costs more than just their salary. Benefits and other compensation, like equity, should be considered, as well as the considerable time investment employers make when they hire someone. It depends on the nature and the investment of the new hire, but it can be 6 months or more before the employer sees a positive return on their investment in the employee in the form of full productivity. And I've seen that in so many different other articles that it maps out, here's the process, here's where you can expect somebody to be at full productivity, et cetera, et cetera. And I've seen things that say here at week 3, at week 4, 3 months in, 6 months in, and so on. But it's a high dollar in any way we look at it, that when it takes that long to really get that productivity when we bring somebody onto the team. Now, if we've taken action on giving our best folks a reason to stay that we looked at before, we're at least on the right track to addressing that profitability killer that exists in recruiting costs, right? Because we just don't have to do as much, but there's still more we can do, a bunch more. Now, a few years ago in this program, I shared a lesson called The Importance of Employee Retention, where as a whole, it was clearly focused on the primary idea of how do we hang on to our great team members, but it wrapped up by detailing the importance of really being proactive and responsive from the beginning of the recruiting process. So we develop relationships, we show value, and so on. Now, the premise of that was based on the idea that our actions always speak louder than our words. We can have the fanciest ads, the most catchy slogans, and we can even offer the highest sign-on bonuses or wages in our respective industries. But if we're not willing to be responsive to those good candidates who actually do show interest, all that talk about all the great things our company offers is soon going to fall on deaf ears. We're not going to be able to keep their attention. Our reputation is going to kind of lead, right? If we don't follow through on the things we say. Now, here's where you might be thinking that I'm taking shots at maybe some of the folks that wear the HR or recruiting hats, and gosh, I kind of am, but don't make a mistake for lack of responsiveness being the norm in those roles, for believing that they're the ones that sets the tone for poor response times being acceptable in the whole culture of the organization. They're not. While they're often the HR people, the recruiters or whatnot, they're often the primary point of contact that a candidate experiences. This is nearly always just a symptom of a bigger issue. And one of the things I hear Cindy say so often is, gosh, how we do one thing is typically how we do everything. Now, I would challenge you to think back to the lesson that we had in this, where we looked at the profitability that's killed and how leadership really does set the tone in an organization. So if an HR person's doing it, chances are they've seen somebody in that organization exemplify that, hey, being unresponsive is okay, that it's an acceptable behavior within our organization. Now, as we move forward here with addressing how the cost of recruiting kills profitability, I want to take a hard look at how great leadership can improve the process. And then we're going to work through some specific steps leaders can take to make sure everybody involved in that recruiting process gets better results, and great people eventually start knocking at the door to be part of our team. Matter of fact, I just shared that in a group session I did the other day, where I'm saying, hey, over time, how do we make the culture of this group, this organization here, it was a nonprofit, how do we make the culture of this so much that people say, gosh, how can we contribute to the causes that you're contributing to? And I believe it happens that way in organizations as well.
Thanks for listening to the Leading at the Next Level podcast. Next time, we're going to pick up where we left off by digging into how great leadership improves the recruiting process. If you'd like to go deeper, though, into anything that we've shared with you here, or you need continuing education credits for your professional credential, send us an email at admin@dove-development.net. And we'd be happy to hook you up with a 45-day all-access trial to our complete Leading at the Next Level program at no cost. The full program includes access to well over 100 hours of digital lessons, complete with slides and action-based assessments to help you capture measurable bottom-line improvements in your organization. It also comes with 2 live lessons every month that close with Q&A, so we can really make sure we help you identify the specific action you want to take to lead your team more effectively.